Hello and welcome back to Study With Additti. My name is Additti and this channel is dedicated to revision tips and tricks along with much more to help make your schooling life a whole lot easier. Today I'm going to be starting a mini-series, and this mini-series is going to be on my economics wider reading. I'm really interested in economics and just all the different aspects of it, especially managerial economics, and I'm going to be doing some wider reading over the next few weeks, over the next month or two, and I thought that some of you may be in the same position as me, but some of you may not know what to read. So I'm here giving my suggestions and my summaries and reviews of those books, so you can kind of effectively choose what you want to read based on the stuff I've read. And just that way, every week or every 2 weeks, depending on how fast I can read the books, I'm going to be releasing summaries and reviews of the books, so it just becomes easier for you to pick and choose what you want to read. So the book I am reviewing today is called The Undercover Economist by Tim Harford. I got recommended this book because we had to do like a bridging unit between year 11 and year 12, and this was the book that we had to read and then do like a little essay sort of thing on it. It was like a really basic essay, and at that point in time I left the work quite late, so I didn't manage to read the entirety of the book. But recently I thought, you know what, let's try and give it another go. So I started from the beginning again and I really got into it this time. So I'm just going to be talking about what it's about, like chapter by chapter, and also my thoughts on it, based on my own academic experience and just my interests in economics. I have a few notes here, so if I look down at any point, that is why. So Tim Harford himself, he is an economist, a journalist, a broadcaster, and he's written many books, including The Undercover Economist. More recently, I think it was 2012, he wrote The Undercover Economist Strikes Back, and he did a promotion of his book at LSE, where he just gave a talk, and that talk was put onto YouTube and their website, and I watched it and I found it really fascinating. He tells the story of the man behind the Phillips curve, which shows the relationship between unemployment and inflation, and it was just really interesting to hear how someone that was very academically unable managed to get a professorship just because of this one thing that he did. I'm not going to disclose it because I think that you should really just go and watch it. But anyway, back to Tim Harford. He also presents BBC Radio 4's More or Less programme, which is about statistics and what they really show. So that's a brief biography of Tim Harford, and now let's just get into a chapter by chapter summary of the book. The first chapter was Who Pays for Your Coffee, and this chapter is all about coffee shops, as you might have imagined, and about price targeting used to places like Starbucks. And he also puts a bit of humour in there as well, which is really nice and refreshing. And he mentions the power of scarcity and how that power can allow firms to do a lot more. So that's the first chapter. The second chapter is about what supermarkets don't want you to know. That's what it's called. And again, this is a really interesting chapter because it's really relatable, because I'm sure you've been shopping yourself. Tim Harford himself talks about a unique price targeting strategy and then a group one. And so a unique one might be something like how Amazon put cookies on their website a long time ago. They don't do that anymore. But what that does is it makes prices on their website appear different for every person depending on their history and their purchases. Chapter 3 is called Perfect Market and the World of Truth. And a perfect market is, I think it's also known as a perfectly competitive market, is where there's loads and loads of competition, and perfect markets improve efficiency. That is because companies are making things the right way, they are making the right things, they are making things in the right proportion, and they are making it and selling it to the right people. These 4 things are like the characteristics of a perfect market, as Tim Harford says. And when you think about it, he's absolutely right. That way you cannot gain any more from the market, meaning it is perfectly efficient, and that's what we want. However, you may have realised that might not always cause a fair economy, and Tim Harford recognises this and also talks about this. The 5th chapter is called Crosstown Traffic, and it's all about externalities. So an externality is a third-party cost, and there can be positive externalities and also negative externalities. A negative externality would be traffic, and this is the example that he also uses in this chapter. So an externality is a type of market failure, and market failure can also be caused by asymmetric information, which is where one party has more information than another party in a transaction. So usually like the seller has more information than the buyer does. It can also occur if certain firms have high scarcity power as well. So as I mentioned, he used the example of traffic and the idea of externality charges. So for example, quite some time ago, there was a very, very long traffic jam in China. I think it was like something like 2 weeks, and Tim Harford poses the idea of externality charges, which are basically charging someone, in this case, for driving. So if more people are charged, they are less likely to drive. They might take a bus, they might walk, they might cycle, etc. So externality charges can be really helpful for that. But externalities are really hard to measure as well, and he touches on that. He also looks at the idea of pollution and trade permits. So China at the moment is trying to use trade permits, and a trade permit is basically a permit that allows you to pollute, but you have to pay for it. And the number of permits goes down like every few years or something. So it incentivizes companies to find cleaner ways of producing what they were producing before. Especially having studied that in the first year of the A-level course, it's really interesting because I can take what I've learned in class and really put it into context and think not just in a way that, oh okay, school is teaching me this, but the wider issue. And I think that this book is really good for A-level students because it touches on things like globalization, but also externalities and market failure, as we just said. But anyway, chapter 5 is the inside story, and that is all about the used cars dilemma with peaches and lemons. This is a really famous economic dilemma. It's all about asymmetric information where one party has more info than the other. So anyway, if you don't know anything about it, a peach is a good car and a lemon is a bad car. And because the seller has more information than the buyer, but they're still wanting to get rid of their bad cars, which are the lemons, they are not going to tell the buyer which one's a peach and which one's a lemon. And so a buyer may spend more on a lemon when it's just not worth it, but they may also spend less on a peach because they don't know which one's a lemon or a peach. So that dilemma is really, really fascinating. And again, it's another form of market failure because it's destroying the perfect market. The next chapter is called Rational Insanity, and it looks at the stock market, and it really discusses the theory of random walk. So the random walk theory is that the more rational the behaviour of investors, the more erratic the behaviour of the stock market will be. It's about the idea of doing what everyone else is doing, and the fact that because people are doing certain things, you tend to follow, which then changes the situation altogether. He explains it much better than I do in this. Then chapter 7 is called The Men Who Knew the Value of Nothing, and this is about game theory. I had not come across game theory before I came across this book. It's about how there is maths in the decisions that we make. So the definition of game theory is how your predictions of the actions of someone else affect what you do. And so like it can be used for poker. That's a really notorious example. To be able to quantify something like a social interaction is really different, and it's more of the psychological aspect of economics. So yeah, game theory was pioneered by John Nash, who was actually in A Beautiful Mind, which is a really good film, so watch that, and also by John von Neumann, and it's been used by the UK government for auctioning radio spectrum rights. So like on the radio you get like 93.4, 100, 102.3, all those different frequencies are along the spectrum, and he compares it to a house to make it really more relatable to you, because I doubt you have much exposure to radio spectrum rights, but when you put it in the semantic field of a house, it's much more interesting. The next chapter is about why countries are poor. He looks at the specific example of Cameroon, and because he's been there himself, it becomes almost like a story at this point, like almost like fiction, which is really, again, refreshing. And he also explains why countries are poor, and it's not just to do with education and infrastructure. So the penultimate chapter is called Beers, Fries and Globalization, and it's a really quirky title, but you quickly understand why it's called that. Obviously the chapter is based on globalization, which I found probably the best chapter of them all, because I currently do geography and I really like the idea of globalization. Just some of the ideas that he mentions are the fact that free trade is best for the world, and he is supporting the fact that we should not have many trade barriers. And one of the facts that he mentioned absolutely blew me away. Because the book was written in 2005, this statistic is for 2005. But even then, right. In 2005, China, with 1/4 of the world's population, only produced less than 4% of the world's exports. Now that was absolutely crazy. I was absolutely stunned by that. I'm sure that's changed, but even then, it's absolutely astounding. And he also mentions the fact that foreign direct investment is really good. And he says it causes the multiplier effect, which if you've studied economics before, I'm sure you'll have come across. Yeah, so he says it's really good for industries like property, commerce and the informal economy even. He also mentions that the fact that globalization can be green, and the fact that it is becoming more green as we speak. If you combine economics with the environment, it's a really incredible duo together, and it can take a country really far in terms of its progress. The last chapter is called How China Grew Rich, and this chapter discusses how a poor-stricken country like China became a really global world superpower in today's terms, and the fact that they managed to build an equivalent to Manhattan, which is now Shanghai, in only a few years, which is absolutely incredible. And it's to do with their good investment, their good planning, and the fact that they are globalizing, they are connecting to the world. So that's this chapter summary. I'm just going to give a few comments of my own about the book. So as I've said, I've really enjoyed the chapters on globalization, game theory, and also what supermarkets don't want you to know. It was also really nice to see externalities in there. I think that the supermarkets chapter was definitely the most relatable, and this is what Tim Harford has done in this book. He's made it so accessible for anyone trying to just learn a bit more about economics. So I hope you enjoyed this summary and review of Tim Harford's Undercover Economist. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm at 980 or so, and I really would like to get to 1,000 by the 26th of June, because the 26th of June, if you've been watching my channel for that long, you'll know that that is the date of which I first posted my first ever video, and so it's going to be my first YouTube anniversary, and I really hope to get to 1K by then. So yeah, also hit the bell icon while you're at it. And one thing I'd really like to know in the comments, how did you find my channel? It'd be really interesting to know. Thank you again for watching, and goodbye.